The little black girl begged the biker, saying someone dumped her mom's ID beside a forbidden shipment stack. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. A little black girl was running as fast as her small legs could carry her. Tears were streaming down her face, and her breath came in gasps, the fear and panic overwhelming her. She was barefoot, her clothes torn from running through the streets. She spotted a group of bikers gathered near a diner, their engines still warm from the ride. The sound of her frantic footsteps caught the attention of one of the bikers, a tall man with a weathered face and a leather jacket. His eyes softened as he saw the distress in her face. She didn't slow down until she reached them, and when she did, she collapsed into the arms of one of the bikers, sobbing uncontrollably. "Please help me," she gasped between sobs. "They took my mom. Someone dumped her ID next to a forbidden shipment stack." The bikers exchanged uneasy looks, recognizing the gravity of her words. The girl, still shaking, looked up at the biker who had caught her. "Please," she begged. "They're going to hurt her." The biker, whose name was Jack, looked at his fellow riders, all of whom were hardened by years of life on the road. They had seen a lot, but this felt different. Jack's hand gripped the girl's shoulder, trying to offer some comfort. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice low but steady. The little girl sniffed and pointed down a narrow alleyway that led to a rundown industrial district. "Down there," she said, her voice trembling with fear. "I saw them put her in a truck, and they went that way." Jack's heart sank. This wasn't just a simple domestic issue. Something much darker was unfolding. He looked at his crew, and without a word, they mounted their bikes. The engines roared to life, cutting through the stillness of the night. "Stay close," Jack ordered. "We stick together, we stay smart. No one gets left behind." The group of bikers, a mix of men and women with years of experience between them, fell in line, following Jack's lead. The girl was still in shock, clinging to Jack's leather jacket as they rode out. The night air was cold, the wind biting at their skin, but nothing could have been colder than the situation they were racing toward. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a rescue mission. They weren't just dealing with a scared little girl and her mother. They were about to confront something far worse. As they sped down the road, the headlights from their bikes illuminated the dark alleyways and abandoned buildings that seemed to stretch endlessly ahead. Jack's mind raced as he thought about the forbidden shipment stack the girl had mentioned. What kind of trouble had her mother gotten involved in? And who were these people who would take her, leaving only a hint of what had happened behind? As the group approached the industrial district, the silence was broken only by the hum of their engines. They came to a halt near the edge of the district, where the shadows of large trucks loomed in the distance. "We need to be careful," Jack warned. "If they're still here, we don't know who we're dealing with." The bikers, seasoned veterans of many dangerous situations, nodded in agreement. Jack turned to the girl, his expression serious. "Stay close and keep quiet," he instructed her. She nodded, still shaken, but determined to help them find her mother. They moved cautiously, their boots crunching on the gravel as they advanced toward the truck yard. Jack's hand rested on the handle of his bike, ready to move at a moment's notice. The stakes had never felt higher, and they all knew that what happened next would change everything. The group of bikers, their engines still humming with power, carefully made their way toward the abandoned industrial district. Jack, at the head of the pack, scanned the surroundings. The girl, still clinging to his jacket, looked exhausted, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. Jack's mind raced as he thought about the words she had spoken. The forbidden shipment stack, her mother's ID. What had her mother gotten involved in? And why had she been targeted? They reached the entrance to the district, a maze of dilapidated buildings and rusted-out trucks. The air was thick with the smell of oil and dust, the perfect cover for whatever dangerous dealings were taking place here. Jack motioned for the group to stop. They dismounted their bikes with precision, each member moving into position like they had done countless times before. The wind was biting, and the silence around them was eerie. Jack turned to the girl, his voice soft but firm. "Stay close and keep quiet." We'll get your mom out of here, I promise. She nodded, tears still streaking down her face, but there was a hint of hope in her eyes. She wasn't sure what kind of people these bikers were, but she knew they were her only chance. Jack motioned to his crew. We'll split up. Bear, you take the left. Storm, you and Phantom check the back. Wrench, stay here and keep an eye on the entrance. The rest of you, follow me. The bikers nodded, each of them ready for what came next. As they moved further into the industrial complex, the sounds of their boots on the gravel echoed in the stillness. They passed abandoned trucks and shipping containers, their metal frames covered in rust. The area felt like a forgotten ghost town, untouched by time or progress. Jack's hand was never far from his sidearm, ready for whatever danger lay ahead. They reached a large warehouse near the center of the district. Jack felt a chill run down his spine as he looked up at the building. The large metal doors were closed, but there was a small gap on one side. He motioned for his crew to gather around. This is it, he whispered. We need to move fast. We don't know how many people are inside, but I'm guessing they're armed. The bikers exchanged looks of understanding. They had faced tough situations before, but this felt different. It wasn't just about protecting a girl. It was about taking down whatever criminal operation was running in this district. Jack reached for the door, but before he could touch it, a voice rang out from behind them. Stop! The bikers froze. Jack's eyes narrowed. He had heard that voice before. It was deep and menacing, the kind of voice that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand. Up. Slowly, they turned to face the source of the voice. A man emerged from the shadows, his face partially covered by a bandana, his hand resting on the grip of a large pistol. He was flanked by two other men, each of them armed and ready. Jack stepped forward, his posture calm but defensive. Who are you? He asked, his voice steady. The man in the bandana smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. I should be asking you that question, he replied. This is our territory. You don't belong here. Jack's mind raced. This was the moment they had been preparing for. He knew that the bikers had the advantage in terms of numbers and skill, but these men seemed to know the area well. They could be a serious threat. We're just here to take care of a situation, Jack said, keeping his voice level. A little girl needs her mother. The man's smile faltered for just a second, but then he laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the empty district. A little girl, he said, mocking Jack. You think you're going to save her? This is bigger than you, man. You're in over your head. Jack's gaze hardened. I'm not leaving without her. The man's hand tightened on his pistol. The tension in the air was palpable. One wrong move, and this could escalate quickly. Jack's crew tensed, ready for action. But just as the man took a step forward, the sound of a motorcycle engine roared in the distance. Jack's head snapped around, his instincts kicking in. The sound of the bike grew louder, and within moments, a familiar figure appeared on the horizon. It was Storm, speeding down the road on his Harley, followed by several other bikers. Jack's heart skipped a beat. The reinforcements had arrived. The man in the bandana cursed under his breath, realizing that he was now outnumbered. He turned to his men and gave a quick signal. In a flash, the three of them scattered, ducking behind crates and vehicles, taking cover. Jack didn't waste a second. Move out, he shouted. The bikers sprang into action, rushing toward the warehouse with the kind of precision only a well-trained crew could manage. They moved as one, covering each other as they made their way inside. The air was thick with the sound of engines revving and boots hitting the ground. The bikers were a force to be reckoned with, and they weren't about to let anyone stand in their way. As they entered the warehouse, Jack's mind was focused on one thing: getting the little girl's mother out of there safely. He didn't know what kind of operation was running in this place, but he knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came to light. The next few moments would be critical, and he wasn't about to let anything or anyone stop him from completing his mission. The bikers moved quickly through the darkened warehouse, their eyes scanning the shadows for any signs of movement. The air inside was thick with dust, the smell of oil, and the metallic scent of old equipment. Jack led the way, his steps steady as he gripped his gun with one hand and kept an eye on the surroundings with the other. Behind him, his crew followed in perfect formation, their instincts sharp and their focus unwavering. They had come this far, and there was no turning back. As they moved deeper into the warehouse, the sound of their boots echoed off the concrete walls, the only noise in the otherwise silent space. Jack felt his pulse quicken. They were getting closer to the heart of whatever operation was being run here, and he had a feeling they were about to uncover something far darker than they had imagined. The girl, still clutching his jacket, followed closely behind him, her wide eyes darting around nervously. Jack glanced back at her, trying to offer a reassuring smile, but he could see the fear still etched on her face. She was holding it together, but Jack knew the trauma of what she had witnessed would stay with her for a long time. He had to get her mother out of here, and he had to do it fast. "We keep moving," Jack murmured to his crew. "Stay sharp. We don't know how many of them are in here." The group continued their advance, carefully maneuvering around stacks of old crates and rusted machinery. It wasn't long before they reached a large, open area at the center of the warehouse. Jack's eyes locked onto the scene in front of him, and his heart sank. There, in the middle of the floor, was a group of men standing around, their backs turned. They were talking in low voices, not aware that the bikers had infiltrated their territory. Jack could see a figure in the center of the group, a woman. It was her. It was the girl's mother. She was tied to a chair, her head slumped forward as if she had been knocked out. Jack's stomach tightened. He had to act quickly. He motioned for his crew to spread out, signaling them to surround the group of men. The bikers moved silently, positioning themselves in such a way that no one would be able to escape or call for help. Jack took a deep breath and stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "Let her go," he commanded, his voice firm and unwavering. The men froze. They hadn't expected anyone to find them so quickly, and certainly not a group of bikers. One of the men turned slowly, his hand going to the gun at his waist. "You think you can just walk in here and tell us what to do?" he sneered, his voice laced with arrogance. "This is our operation, not yours." Jack's eyes narrowed. "I don't care about your operation," he said coldly. "But I do care about getting this woman out of here." The man's eyes flickered to the others, and for a brief moment, Jack saw uncertainty. These men were hardened criminals, used to getting their way, but they weren't prepared for the intensity of the bikers. "You're making a mistake," the man said, stepping forward. "We've got connections, and you won't make it out of here alive." Jack didn't flinch. "You're outnumbered," he said simply, his voice cold as steel. "And you're not in control here anymore." The bikers moved in, ready for a fight, but Jack raised a hand, signaling for them to hold back. He knew that this wasn't the time for violence, at least not yet. "We'll do this the easy way," he said, his eyes locked on the man. "You let her go, and we'll leave without causing more trouble. Keep her, and we'll make sure this place is never used again." The tension in the air was thick, and for a moment, no one moved. The man looked around at his crew, his hand still resting on his weapon. Jack could see the conflict in his eyes. This wasn't a fight they were prepared for. The bikers weren't just some random thugs. They were a family, bound by loyalty and respect. And Jack knew that these men, as ruthless as they were, wouldn't risk a full-scale confrontation with them. After what felt like an eternity, the man let out a long sigh, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Fine," he muttered, his voice low. "Take her. She's of no use to us now." Jack nodded, his gaze never leaving the man's eyes. "Smart choice." He turned to the girl, who had been standing quietly behind him, watching the exchange. "It's over," he said softly, offering her a small smile. She didn't return it, but the relief on her face was undeniable. Jack moved toward the woman, cutting her free from the ropes that bound her to the chair. She slumped forward in his arms, her body limp. He checked her pulse and let out a relieved breath when he realized she was still alive. "She's been drugged," Jack muttered to the crew. "But she's alive." With that, the bikers quickly gathered their things, preparing to leave the warehouse before more trouble could arrive. Jack turned to the girl, who was now clinging to her mother's side. "We're getting you both out of here," he said, his voice gentle. "You're safe now." The girl looked up at him, her face still streaked with tears, but there was something different in her eyes now. Hope. As the bikers made their way back to their bikes, the quiet hum of their engines filled the air. They had completed their mission, but Jack knew that this was just the beginning of a long road ahead for this little girl and her mother. There were still many battles to fight, but for now, they had won. Jack looked at his crew, nodding in approval. They had done what they came here to do, and they had done it as a family. The bikers rode out of the industrial district, the sound of their engines reverberating through the still night. Jack glanced over at the girl, her face pressed against her mother's shoulder, her eyes closed in exhaustion. Her mother, though still weak from the drugging, was beginning to stir, the color slowly returning to her face. The group had made it out, barely, but Jack knew they weren't safe yet. They had to get far away from this place before the authorities or anyone connected to the operation showed up. As they rode down the highway, Jack felt the weight of the girl's trust. She had put her faith in them, and he wasn't about to let her down. They reached the outskirts of the city when Jack signaled for the group to pull over. The moonlight illuminated the road, casting long shadows on the asphalt. The rest of the bikers dismounted, each of them tired but alert. Jack turned to them, his voice low but firm. "We need to keep moving. We're not out of the woods yet. We don't know who else is involved in this, and we don't know how far this goes." The bikers nodded in agreement. They had all seen the girl's mother, the bruises on her neck, the signs of years of abuse. This wasn't just a simple rescue. This was the beginning of something much bigger. Jack turned to the girl and her mother. "We're going to find you both a safe place to stay," he said softly, his voice reassuring. "You're not alone anymore." The girl looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. She didn't say anything, but the silent thank you in her gaze spoke volumes. Her mother, now awake but groggy, tried to sit up, her eyes scanning the group. Jack knelt beside her, offering her a reassuring smile. "You're safe now," he said gently. "We'll get you the help you need." The woman nodded weakly, still disoriented. She looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Jack placed a hand on her shoulder, giving her a comforting squeeze. "Don't worry about that. We're family, and family looks out for each other." The bikers gathered around, forming a circle of protection. They weren't just a group of riders. They were a brotherhood, a family forged in fire and loyalty. And no one, not even the most dangerous criminal organization, was going to break that bond. As they continued to ride through the night, Jack kept his eyes on the rearview mirror, always alert for signs of trouble. They weren't out of danger yet. There were still too many unknowns, too many risks. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of purpose that went beyond the road or the next ride. This was about more than just keeping a promise to a fallen friend. This was about protecting the innocent, standing up against the people who thought they could get away with anything. They reached the edge of town, where a small, safe house waited. It was far enough from the city to be secure, but close enough for the bikers to keep watch. Jack led the way, guiding the group into the driveway. The house was modest, but it was a sanctuary, quiet and secure. As they unloaded the bikes and helped the woman and her daughter inside, Jack took a moment to reflect. They had come so far, but the journey wasn't over. There were still questions to be answered, and the people behind the operation weren't going to let this go easily. The bikers had made enemies tonight, and those enemies would stop at nothing to cover their tracks. But Jack wasn't worried. They had fought for their own in the past, and they would fight again if they had to. As he stood at the door, watching the others bring in supplies and make the house as comfortable as possible, Jack felt the weight of the promise he had made to his fallen friend. He would protect this family, no matter what. The night was still young, but Jack knew that tomorrow would bring more challenges. It was only a matter of time before the shadows of the past caught up with them. But for now, they were safe. And that was enough. Jack turned to the crew. "Let's get some rest," he said. "We've got a long road ahead." The bikers nodded, their faces determined. They had come together for a reason, and they would stand by each other through whatever came next. As the door closed behind them, the quiet settled in. The world outside could wait for a little while. For now, they had done what they had set out to do. They had saved a life, and that was enough to give them the strength to face whatever came next. The quiet of the safe house was a welcome relief after the chaos of the night. The bikers had set up watch, taking turns to make sure they were prepared for anything. Jack stood near the window, his eyes scanning the horizon. The world outside felt still, but Jack knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. Inside, the woman was resting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her daughter by her side. They were both exhausted, emotionally drained from the ordeal, but for the first time in days, they were safe. The girl had barely spoken since they arrived, but Jack could tell she was processing everything. He understood. She had just been through something no child should ever witness. Jack's mind was racing. The operation they had uncovered was only a small part of something much bigger. The fact that the woman had been involved, even unknowingly, made it clear that there were more people at risk, more lives to protect. He couldn't just walk away from this. They had made enemies, and those enemies would be coming for them. But Jack wasn't the kind of man to run. He had a job to do. He turned from the window and walked toward the girl and her mother. "How are you feeling?" he asked softly. The woman looked up, her face pale but calm. "I'm alive," she said, her voice hoarse. "I can't say much more than that." Jack nodded. He understood. She had been through hell, and it would take time for her to heal. "You're safe now," he reassured her. "We're not going anywhere until we make sure you both get the help you need." The woman's eyes softened, gratitude flooding her face. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cracking. Jack gave her a small smile before turning his attention to the girl. She was sitting on the floor, her arms wrapped around her knees. Jack walked over and knelt down in front of her. "Hey," he said gently. "I know you're scared, but you're safe now. I promise we're not going to let anything happen to you." The girl looked up at him, her eyes wide and filled with fear, but there was something else in them now, trust. "Will they come for us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack hesitated. He didn't want to lie to her. "We'll make sure they don't," he said, his voice steady. "But we have to stay vigilant. There are people out there who will try to hurt you, to hurt your mom, but we're ready for them." The girl nodded slowly, her small hand gripping Jack's arm. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice trembling. Jack placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's okay to be scared," he said softly. "But you're not alone. We're here with you, and we'll protect you." She looked up at him, her face still filled with fear, but a faint glimmer of hope shone through. "Thank you," she whispered. Jack smiled. "You're welcome," he said quietly. As he stood and moved away, he noticed the other bikers talking in the corner, their voices low but urgent. They had been discussing the next steps, and Jack knew it was time to make a decision. He walked over to the group, his mind already working on the plan. "We need to move fast," he said. "This is bigger than we thought. They'll be looking for us soon, and we can't afford to waste any time." The bikers nodded, all of them in agreement. "We need to find out who's behind this," Jack continued. "And we need to make sure they can't hurt anyone else." The team quickly got to work, organizing a plan to track down the people responsible. It wasn't going to be easy. The enemy they were up against was well connected, and they had the resources to make anyone who stood in their way disappear. But Jack had been in situations like this before. He knew how to get things done. As the bikers prepared for their next move, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to step into something much larger than they had anticipated. The more they dug, the more dangerous it would become. But there was no turning back now. They had made a promise to protect the girl and her mother, and Jack would do whatever it took to keep that promise. He knew the stakes were high, but he wasn't afraid. He had a family to protect, and he would burn everything down to keep them safe. As the crew mounted their bikes and prepared to leave, Jack looked at the girl one last time. She was standing at the door, her eyes wide with uncertainty, but there was a hint of hope in her gaze. Jack nodded to her, offering a silent promise that he would never break. With that, the bikers revved their engines and rode off into the night, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The road would be long, and the dangers would be many, but they were prepared. Jack wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for a future, for the little girl who had trusted him, and for a family that needed to be kept safe. The next morning, the bikers regrouped at their makeshift headquarters. The air was thick with tension, but there was a sense of resolve that kept everyone focused. Jack stood at the head of the table, looking over the map spread out before him. His fingers traced the routes, the locations where they had already tracked some leads, but the trail was growing colder by the minute. They had gathered some intelligence about the operation, but it was clear they were dealing with a much larger network than they originally thought. The people behind the trafficking and illegal shipments were far more organized and far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Jack glanced at the others in the room. Bear, Storm, Wrench, and the rest of the crew were already deep in conversation, discussing their next move. "We need to hit them where it hurts," Storm said, his voice low but firm. "They're too spread out, too well protected. If we just go in without a plan, we'll end up with more enemies than we can handle." Jack nodded, taking in the information. Storm was right. They had to be smarter than this. They had to gather intel, find out who was calling the shots, and strike when they were least expecting it. "We hit the supply chain," Jack said, his voice steady. "They're moving something big, and they're doing it in plain sight. We need to find out exactly what they're shipping, where it's going, and who's involved. We take their operation down from the inside. The bikers gathered around the table, each of them analyzing the map, looking for any signs that could lead them to their target. It wasn't going to be easy. They would have to infiltrate a highly guarded network, but they had no choice. The girl and her mother were just the beginning. There were still too many lives at risk. We need to move fast, Jack continued. We don't know how much time we have before they realize we're onto them. The crew was already moving into action. Bear and Phantom would go to one of the shipping warehouses they had identified, posing as interested buyers to get inside and gather more information. Wrench and Colossus would cover their backs, making sure no one tipped off the operation. The rest of the crew would stay on standby, ready to step in if things got out of hand. Jack and the girl's mother would stay behind, keeping a low profile in case they needed to make a quick escape. The plan was risky, but it was their best shot at taking down the people behind this operation. As the bikers prepared to leave, Jack turned to the girl, who had been sitting quietly in the corner of the room, watching them. You stay safe here, he said gently. We'll be back as soon as we can. The girl nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude, though there was still a trace of fear in them. Jack could see how much this was weighing on her. She had lost so much already, and now she was thrust into a fight she hadn't chosen. But there was no going back now. Jack walked over to the woman, who was sitting by the window, looking out at the quiet street. She hadn't said much since they arrived, but Jack could see the exhaustion in her eyes. How are you holding up? He asked softly. She looked up at him, her expression weary but determined. I'm okay, she said, though her voice was barely above a whisper. It's just hard to believe all of this is happening. 1 minute, everything is normal, and the next, my life is turned upside down. Jack nodded, understanding all too well. He had seen this kind of thing before. Families caught in the crossfire of something much bigger than they ever could have imagined. We're going to make sure you're safe, he promised her. We're not leaving until this is over. The woman gave him a faint smile, the first one he had seen from her since they arrived. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Jack gave her a reassuring nod before turning to leave. The crew was already geared up and ready to go. They didn't have time to waste. As they rode out of the safe house, Jack's mind was focused on one thing, bringing this to an end. They had taken the first step, but there was still so much left to do. The enemy they were up against was ruthless, and they would stop at nothing to protect their operation. But Jack wasn't backing down. He had made a promise to the girl, to her mother, and to his crew. They were going to fight until the very end. As the bikers sped down the highway, the wind in their faces and the sound of the engines roaring in their ears, Jack couldn't help but think about the road ahead. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be danger, betrayal, and hard choices to make. But Jack had learned long ago that the only way to survive in this world was to keep fighting, no matter how difficult it got. They were ready. The battle had only just begun. The sun had barely risen when the bikers arrived at the edge of the shipping warehouse district. Jack could feel the tension in the air, thick with anticipation. The engines of the motorcycles roared softly as they slowed, coming to a stop just outside the perimeter. They had been driving for hours, their minds focused on the task at hand. The crew had come together quickly, working as a unit, knowing that the stakes were higher than ever. Jack looked over at Bear, Storm, and the others. Their faces were set with determination, the same expression they wore when they knew things were about to get intense. This is it, Jack said, his voice steady. We go in, get the intel, and get out. No heroics. We need to know what they're shipping and who's behind it. We find that, and we take down the whole operation. Bear nodded, his large frame towering over the rest of the crew. Understood, he said, checking the ammo in his gun holster. We stay low, stay quiet. We don't make a scene unless we have to. The bikers dismounted, each of them moving with practiced ease, blending into the shadows. Jack's heart was pounding in his chest, but he kept his focus. He had been in worse situations, and he knew the importance of staying calm. As they crept toward the entrance of the warehouse, Jack's mind kept going back to the girl and her mother. They had come so far, but this was where the real work began. They needed answers, and they needed them fast. The group slipped inside the warehouse, moving quietly between the stacked containers and crates. The place smelled of chemicals and metal, the air heavy with the scent of a place that had long been abandoned by anyone with a conscience. As they made their way deeper into the warehouse, the sound of footsteps echoed through the halls. Jack signaled for everyone to stop, and they crouched low, blending into the shadows. They waited, holding their breath as a group of men in dark clothing walked past them. Jack recognized one of them. He had seen the man at the carnival, the one who had threatened them earlier. This was the leader of the operation. Jack's pulse quickened, but he kept his composure. He motioned for the crew to follow, and they silently moved deeper into the building, keeping an eye on the men as they disappeared around a corner. As they rounded the corner, Jack's eyes locked onto a stack of large shipping containers, each marked with a symbol that looked like a skull. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach. These were the same containers that the girl had mentioned, the ones with the forbidden shipment. They had found what they were looking for. Jack approached the nearest container, motioning for Storm to check the locks. Storm quickly went to work, using his tools to pry open the container. As the door creaked open, a rush of air filled with the smell of chemicals and something else, something worse. Inside, the containers were filled with packages wrapped in plastic, stacked neatly in rows. Jack's eyes scanned the boxes, and then he saw it. A familiar logo on one of the crates. He recognized it from a past operation, one that had gone south years ago. The operation was much bigger than they had imagined. This wasn't just about illegal shipments. This was about weapons. And not just any weapons. These were military-grade, capable of causing massive destruction. Jack's heart sank. They had uncovered something much worse than they expected. "We need to get this intel back to the others," Jack whispered. "We can't take these down alone. It's bigger than us now." Storm nodded, his face grim. "We'll make sure this gets into the right hands," he said. Just as they were about to leave, a loud crash echoed from the other side of the warehouse. Jack's instincts kicked in immediately. "Get down," he shouted, pulling Storm behind a stack of crates. The sound of running footsteps grew louder, and soon, they saw flashlights scanning the area. The enemy was closing in. "We've been compromised," Jack muttered under his breath. "We need to move now." The bikers quickly regrouped, and Jack led them out of the warehouse, staying low and moving swiftly. They couldn't afford to be seen, not with the intel they had just uncovered. The sound of gunshots echoed in the distance as they made their way back to the bikes. Jack's mind raced. The operation was about to get much more dangerous. They couldn't afford to wait. The stakes had just been raised, and the bikers were now in the middle of something far bigger than they had ever anticipated. As they mounted their bikes, Jack's eyes narrowed. They had uncovered the truth, but now they had to fight to survive. This wasn't over. It had just begun. The sun had dipped below the horizon when Jack and his crew arrived at the abandoned factory on the outskirts of the city. The air was thick with tension, each biker's nerves on edge. The intel they had gathered earlier had changed everything. What they thought was just a small-time operation was now revealed to be part of something far bigger and more dangerous. Military-grade weapons, illegal shipments. This was no longer about just protecting one family. They were about to take down a criminal network that could destroy everything they had fought for. Jack felt the weight of the mission pressing on him. His eyes scanned the factory's perimeter, looking for signs of movement. The area was eerily quiet, too quiet. The bikers dismounted, moving into position, their senses sharp as they prepared for what was coming next. Jack turned to his crew, giving them the silent signal to move out. They crept through the shadows, making their way to the main entrance of the factory. There was no turning back now. As they reached the entrance, the sound of muffled voices echoed from inside. Jack's heart raced. They were close. He signaled to Bear and Storm, who would take the lead inside. "We move fast," Jack whispered. "Get the intel, take out the threat, and get out. No messing around. We're not going to let them see us coming." Bear and Storm nodded, and the team moved in. The heavy metal doors creaked open with a groan, revealing the dark interior of the factory. Inside, the air smelled of rust, oil, and decay. The faint light from the moon barely filtered through the grime-covered windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Jack's eyes adjusted quickly to the darkness. They had to move quietly, making sure no one heard them. As they moved deeper into the factory, the sound of voices grew louder. The group pressed forward, staying low, their footsteps silent. Then they saw them. Dozens of men huddled around a large table in the center of the room. Some were armed, Others were busy inspecting crates marked with the same skull logo they had seen before. This was it. They had found the heart of the operation. Jack's pulse quickened as he watched them, his mind racing with what they needed to do next. They had to act fast. "Get ready," Jack murmured to his crew, his voice barely audible. Storm and Bear positioned themselves near the back, ready to flank the group. Jack, Wrench, and the others took their places, preparing to make their move. As the bikers began to move into position, one of the men at the table looked up, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the room. Jack froze. His heart pounded in his chest. It was too late to back out now. The man stood up, his hand reaching for the weapon at his side. "Get down," Jack shouted, and the bikers sprang into action. The first shot rang out, echoing through the factory, followed by a barrage of gunfire. Jack and his crew returned fire, moving swiftly and with precision. The factory erupted into chaos, the once quiet space now filled with the deafening sounds of gunshots and shouts. Jack's mind was sharp, his movements instinctual as he ducked behind a stack of crates, firing at the enemies in his line of sight. He could hear the sound of bullets ricocheting off metal, but he didn't flinch. They had to end this quickly, before the operation's masterminds could escape. Bear and Storm cleared the back of the room, taking down several men who had tried to flank the group. Wrench was providing cover, his eyes scanning for any threats that might have been missed. Jack's heart was still pounding as he pushed forward, his eyes locked on the men who had been running the operation. He had to make sure they didn't get away. As the gunfire began to subside, Jack spotted the leader, a tall man with a cruel look in his eyes, rushing toward the exit. Jack moved fast, intercepting him just as he reached the door. The two men locked eyes for a moment, the tension thick in the air. Jack's grip tightened on his gun. "It's over," he said, his voice cold and steady. The leader smirked, but there was no fear in his eyes. "You think you've won?" he sneered. "You don't know who you're dealing with. This is bigger than you. You've made a mistake." Jack didn't hesitate. He fired a shot into the air, silencing the man. "I'm not here to play games," Jack said, stepping closer to the leader. "You're done." The man gritted his teeth, his eyes flashing with rage, but he didn't make a move. Jack motioned for the rest of the crew to move in. They quickly apprehended the rest of the men, tying them up and securing the area. The factory was finally theirs. As the chaos died down, Jack took a deep breath, his body still humming with adrenaline. They had done it. They had taken down the operation, but Jack knew that this was only the beginning. The man they had captured might be the leader, but there were still more players involved, more dangerous people who would stop at nothing to protect their empire. The bikers gathered around, catching their breath, but Jack's mind was already racing with the next steps. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. He turned to Bear, Storm, and the others. "We need to get this intel back to the right people," Jack said, his voice firm. "And we need to make sure this doesn't happen again. We're not done yet." The factory was still, the quiet aftermath of the battle settling like dust in the air. The men Jack and his crew had taken down were now bound and left under the watchful eyes of the bikers who stood guard, the cold metal of their weapons gleaming in the dim light. The adrenaline had faded, but the tension in the air was palpable. Jack surveyed the room, his mind sharp as ever. The operation was disrupted, but Jack knew it wasn't the end. He turned to Bear, Storm, and the others, his voice low but resolute. "We can't rest yet. We have what we came for, but there's more to this. We need to make sure these guys don't come back. And we need to figure out how deep this thing really goes." The crew nodded in agreement, their expressions serious. Wrench, the ever-cautious one, was already pulling out the maps and documents they had seized from the factory. "I'm thinking we should split up," Jack continued. "Storm, Bear, and I will get this intel to the authorities. The rest of you stay here and keep these guys under wraps. We can't afford to let them slip through our fingers." The crew didn't hesitate. They had come this far together, and they knew the stakes. As Jack, Storm, and Bear left the warehouse, the rest of the bikers kept their positions. Outside, the night air was thick with anticipation, the quiet hum of the engines filling the silence. Jack's mind was still racing, thinking about the bigger picture. He had promised the girl and her mother that they would be safe, and he wasn't about to break that promise. They had uncovered weapons-grade material, and whoever was behind this would do anything to protect their operations. Jack could feel it. The clock was ticking, and the walls were closing in. As they approached the rendezvous point with the authorities, Jack kept his gaze fixed on the horizon. The weight of the intel in his hands felt heavier than ever. They had just uncovered a dangerous underworld, but they had only scratched the surface. He could feel the danger closing in. They had to act fast. When they met the authorities, Jack handed over the documents, his eyes never leaving the agent's face as he explained the situation. "We need full protection for the girl and her mother," Jack said firmly. "This operation goes deeper than just weapons. These people have connections everywhere. They'll do anything to cover their tracks." The agent nodded, his expression grim. "We'll get a team together. You did good work here, but you can't do this alone. It's time to take them down once and for all." Jack exchanged a look with Storm and Bear. They knew the fight wasn't over yet. They had disrupted the operation, but the enemy was still out there, watching, waiting. As they returned to the safe house, Jack's mind was still spinning. They couldn't rest on their laurels. There were still too many loose ends, and they knew that the people behind the operation would come for them, soon. They had made a powerful enemy, and it was only a matter of time. Before the retaliation began, back at the safe house, the girl and her mother were waiting, the girl's eyes still full of fear, but also a glimmer of hope. Jack walked over to them, kneeling in front of the girl. "You're safe now," he said gently. "We've got them, but it's not over yet. There's more to this, but we'll handle it. I promise." The girl nodded slowly, her small hand clutching her mother's. "Thank you," she whispered. Jack smiled softly, though his mind was elsewhere. This wasn't just about protecting a mother and her daughter. It was about taking down an entire criminal network. And Jack was prepared to do whatever it took. He turned to the crew, his voice steady but full of determination. "We can't afford to stop now. They'll come after us. But we're ready. We finish this, and we finish it right." The bikers nodded, their resolve as strong as ever. They had come this far, and they weren't about to let up now. As the night stretched on, Jack felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had disrupted the enemy's plans, but the battle was far from over. The bikers knew what they had to do. They had made it through the storm, but now they were headed straight for the heart of the battle. Jack took one last look at the safe house, his mind already working on the next steps. He wasn't about to let the people behind this operation go unpunished. Not while they still had a chance to stop it. They were going to finish what they started. And they weren't backing down. The air was thick with tension as Jack and his crew returned to the safe house after handing over the intel to the authorities. The night had been long, filled with the rush of gunfire and the adrenaline of the operation, but now there was a quiet urgency hanging in the air. Jack's mind was still spinning from the revelations they had uncovered in the warehouse. They had dealt a serious blow to the operation, but Jack knew it wasn't over. There were still too many unanswered questions, and the people behind this were far from finished. Jack stood in the doorway, his eyes scanning the room. The girl was sitting with her mother on the couch, her small hands gripping the blanket tightly as she looked around. Nervously, her mother, still weak from the ordeal, was resting, but there was an air of unease that hung over both of them. Jack walked over to them, his face softening as he crouched down in front of the girl. "How are you holding up?" he asked gently. The girl looked up at him, her eyes still wide with fear, but there was something else there now, a flicker of hope. "I'm scared," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Will they come after us again?" Jack felt a pang of sympathy in his chest, but he held her gaze. "They'll try," he said, his voice steady. "But we're ready for them. We won't let anything happen to you or your mom." She nodded slowly, the fear still in her eyes, but Jack could see that she was starting to trust him. That trust was everything now. He needed to keep his promise. He turned to her mother, who had opened her eyes and was now looking at him with gratitude. "We're going to make sure you're safe," Jack said, his tone firm but comforting. "You've been through hell, but we're not going to let you go through it alone. We'll find a way to end this." Her mother nodded, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what we would have done without you." Jack gave her a small smile before standing up. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing on him, but there was no time to dwell on it. He had to act, and he had to act fast. He turned to the rest of the crew. "We need to regroup and plan our next move," he said, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. "This operation is bigger than we thought, and it's not just about taking down some criminals. It's about stopping something that could tear this city apart." The crew nodded, all of them understanding the gravity of the situation. Bear, Storm, and Wrench were already checking their gear, preparing for whatever came next. Jack took a deep breath and went to the table, where the map and documents were spread out. The pieces were starting to come together, but there were still gaps. They knew the operation involved weapons and illegal shipments. But what was the end game? Who was pulling the strings? Jack's phone buzzed on the table, snapping him out of his thoughts. He picked it up, and the name on the screen made his stomach tighten. It was an encrypted message from the authorities. Jack, this is Agent Lewis. We've got a lead. There's a shipment scheduled to leave the port in 2 days. It's heavily guarded, but if we move quickly, we can intercept it. Jack's mind raced. This was it, the chance to finally put an end to the operation. He glanced over at Storm, who was already looking at him, anticipation in his eyes. We're going to hit the port, Jack said, his voice firm. Get the team ready. We'll take them down, no matter what. The bikers gathered their gear, checking their weapons and bikes one last time. The crew knew that this would be the biggest mission yet, but they were ready. They had come this far together, and there was no turning back now. Jack looked at the girl and her mother one last time before leaving. Stay safe here, he said gently. We'll be back soon. The girl nodded, her grip tightening on her mother's hand. Jack could see the fear still in her eyes, but there was also something else, determination. She had already been through more than most people could imagine, but she had made it this far. She would make it through the rest of this. Jack knew that. He had to make sure of it. As the bikers revved their engines and rode out into the night, Jack's thoughts were already on the port. This was their chance to end the operation once and for all. They had the intel, and now they had a plan. The road ahead would be dangerous, but Jack knew they had to take it. There was no turning back now. The fate of the city, and the safety of the girl and her mother, rested on what happened next. The port loomed ahead, a dark, sprawling maze of steel and concrete. The sounds of the water lapping against the docks were drowned out by the roar of the bikers' engines as they neared the entrance. Jack felt the weight of the mission pressing down on him. This was the final push, the moment that would decide everything. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, but his mind was focused. The stakes were higher than ever, and there was no room for error. Stay close and stay sharp, Jack said into his comms, his voice steady but urgent. The bikers had split into 2 groups, one heading toward the main warehouse, the other taking the perimeter. They had a plan, but everything depended on timing. Jack knew that this would be the moment of truth. The authorities were already waiting for them in the shadows, ready to swoop in once the operation was exposed, but the bikers had to make the first move. The factory had been their first target, but the real prize was here at the port, where everything was coming to a head. The intel they had gathered indicated that a major shipment was set to leave in less than 24 hours. Weapons, illicit materials, everything the operation had been building toward. It was all waiting to be loaded onto a transport vessel, and Jack wasn't going to let that happen. As they crept toward the main warehouse, Jack's heart was pounding in his chest. The sound of their boots on the ground was muffled by the soft hum of the night. The air was thick with salt water, and every shadow seemed to conceal an enemy. Jack's crew moved as one, each person knowing exactly what their role was. No mistakes, no hesitation. They reached the side of the warehouse, where a small service door stood slightly ajar. Jack pushed it open with a creak, motioning for his crew to follow. The darkness inside the warehouse was almost complete, broken only by the dim light from a few hanging bulbs. It smelled like metal and oil, a place where illegal deals had been made for years. As Jack's eyes adjusted to the gloom, he could see stacks of crates, each marked with symbols they had seen before, the same skull insignia. This was it, the heart of the operation. Jack took a slow breath and moved forward. The tension was thick in the air, and every sound felt amplified. The faint sound of voices echoed from the far side of the room, and Jack signaled for the crew to stop. They crouched low behind stacks of crates, waiting. The group of men appeared, moving in a controlled but casual manner. They didn't know they were being watched, not yet. Jack's eyes locked onto the leader of the group, the man they had seen earlier in the factory. This was the one who had been orchestrating everything from the shadows, the mastermind behind the entire operation. Jack's jaw tightened. This time, they weren't going to let him slip away. He gave the signal. Bear and Storm flanked the leader, while the others stayed in position, ready to move. The moment was now. You've been running this operation for too long, Jack said, his voice cutting through the tension. The leader froze, recognizing the voice immediately. His eyes narrowed. "I knew you'd show up eventually," he said with a cold smile. "But you're too late." Jack didn't flinch. "I'm not here to negotiate," he said. "I'm here to end this." The leader reached for his sidearm, but before he could draw it, Bear and Storm moved in, disarming him in a flash. The leader's smile faded, replaced by a look of frustration. "You think you've won?" he sneered. "This is bigger than you, biker. You don't even know who you're up against." Jack stepped closer, his eyes locked on the man. "I don't need to know," he said coldly. "I just need you to stop." The leader gritted his teeth, but before he could retort, the sound of more footsteps echoed from the far side of the warehouse. Jack's heart skipped a beat. They were not alone. The rest of the crew had been surrounded. The leader smirked. "You're outnumbered," he said, his voice filled with venom. "You don't stand a chance." Jack didn't hesitate. "We've been outnumbered before," he said, his voice calm. "And we've always come out on top." The bikers were ready. In an instant, the warehouse erupted into chaos. Jack, Bear, and Storm moved quickly, disarming the remaining men and securing the area. The authorities were on their way, but Jack knew they had to neutralize the threat before reinforcements arrived. Gunfire filled the air, but it was over as quickly as it had started. The bikers moved with precision, clearing the warehouse room by room. The leader, now tied up and kneeling on the floor, glared at Jack. "You think this is the end?" he spat. "You have no idea what's coming for you." Jack stood over him, his face expressionless. "I'm not worried about what's coming for me," he said. "I'm worried about what's happening right now." With the warehouse cleared and the shipment stopped, Jack turned to his crew. "Let's get this." "To the authorities," he said, his voice steady. "We've won today, but we're not done yet." The bikers began to move out, knowing they had accomplished their mission. The fight wasn't over, but they had struck a decisive blow against the criminals who had terrorized the city. Jack looked one last time at the leader, who was being taken away by the authorities. There was a quiet satisfaction in his chest. But Jack knew the battle was just beginning. They had made enemies, and those enemies would be coming for them. It was time to prepare for what was next. The dust had barely settled at the warehouse when Jack and his crew found themselves standing in the middle of an uneasy calm. The operation they had just taken down was a major victory, but they all knew it was just one battle in a much larger war. The authorities had moved in quickly after the shootout, securing the area and starting to process the evidence. The leader they had captured was already being taken away, but Jack could feel the weight of the situation pressing on him. As they walked outside, the sound of their boots crunching on the gravel was the only noise. The moon was high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the scene. Jack walked toward his bike, his mind racing with what had just unfolded. He knew that the fight wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. The leader they had captured was only one piece of a much larger puzzle, and there were still too many unknowns. "We did good tonight," Storm said, stepping up beside Jack. Jack gave him a brief nod, but didn't respond immediately. He was too deep in thought, his eyes scanning the horizon. He had made a promise to protect the girl and her mother, but there was a part of him that knew this wasn't the end of their story. "We need to get back to the safe house," Jack said finally. "We need to keep our eyes on everything. The people behind this operation are not going to stop because we took down one of their guys. We've made ourselves targets, and we need to be ready for whatever comes next." Storm nodded, understanding the gravity of Jack's words. They had won tonight, but the road ahead was still unclear. As the bikers revved their engines and headed back to the safe house, Jack felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. They had struck a blow against a dangerous criminal network, but they had made powerful enemies. Jack's eyes narrowed as he thought about the people they had just taken down. He had seen the fear in the girl's eyes, and he knew that protecting her and her mother was only part of the mission. The larger threat loomed, and Jack wasn't about to let it take root in his city. The safe house was quiet when they arrived. The girl and her mother were resting, but there was an undercurrent of tension in the air. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't safe. Not yet. He knew that the criminals they had disrupted would retaliate. They had to be prepared. Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was an encrypted message from the authorities. "Jack, we've got intel on the larger network. The leader you captured is connected to a much bigger operation. It's global. We're going to need your help to take it down." Jack cursed under his breath. This was bigger than he thought. He looked around at his crew. each of them still catching their breath from the fight. They weren't ready to stop. Jack made a decision. "We're going after them," he said, his voice steady. "The authorities need our help, and we've already got the intel. It's time to finish what we started." The bikers didn't hesitate. They had come this far, and they weren't about to back down now. "We move fast," Jack continued. "We get the intel, we take them down, and we make sure they don't come back. But this time, we have to be smarter. We can't afford to make mistakes." The team nodded, already starting to prepare for the next phase. Jack turned to the girl's mother, who had come to join them. She looked exhausted, her face still pale from the ordeal, but there was a quiet strength in her eyes. "We're going to make sure you both stay safe," Jack assured her. "We're not leaving until this is over." She gave him a small, grateful smile. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. Jack smiled back, his resolve solidifying. "You don't have to thank me. We're family, and we protect our own." As the bikers mounted their bikes once more, Jack's mind was focused. He wasn't just fighting for the girl and her mother anymore. He was fighting for everyone who had ever been hurt by this operation, for everyone who had been left behind in the wake of the criminals they were hunting. The fight was far from over, but Jack wasn't backing down. He would see this through to the end, no matter what it took. They rode into the night, the road ahead uncertain, but they knew one thing for sure. They weren't going to stop until the job was done. The tension in the air was palpable as Jack and his crew approached the heart of the criminal network. The intel they had gathered from their last raid had led them to an old, abandoned warehouse just on the outskirts of the city. This was where it all came to an end. The bikers rode in formation, their engines roaring as they made their way through the quiet streets. The only sounds the distant hum of their motorcycles and the pounding of Jack's heart. This was the final mission. Jack knew that after this, nothing would ever be the same. The girl and her mother were back at the safe house, protected for now, but Jack knew this was bigger than just them. The operation they had been fighting against was about to collapse, but it had taken too much from them already. Too many lives had been torn apart. He wasn't going to let it continue. As they pulled up to the warehouse, Jack signaled for everyone to stop. They dismounted quickly, checking their gear and weapons, making sure everything was in order. This was it. They weren't just going in to collect intel this time. They were going to shut this down for good. Jack's gaze swept over his crew. Storm, Bear, and Wrench were all ready, their faces set with determination. They had fought together, bled together, and now, they were going to finish what they had started. "We go in fast, no mistakes," Jack said, his voice firm. "We take out the people in charge, and make sure no one gets away. This ends tonight." They moved quietly, staying low and sticking to the shadows as they approached the entrance of the warehouse. The place was eerily quiet, but Jack knew better then. To think that meant it was empty. The criminals they were up against were smart. They wouldn't leave the place unguarded. They reached the door, and Bear signaled to Jack. It was time. He kicked the door open, and they poured into the warehouse, weapons raised and ready. The moment the door opened, they were met with a hail of gunfire. The bikers ducked for cover, returning fire with precision. The gunfight was intense, but the bikers had the upper hand. They knew the terrain, they knew how to fight, and they were determined to finish this. Jack moved with purpose, his eyes scanning for their target. He could hear the voices of the men they were fighting, yelling commands to each other, but it didn't matter. Jack wasn't here to negotiate. He was here to end it. As the bikers pushed forward, clearing the warehouse room by room, Jack's mind was focused on the leader, the one who had been pulling the strings from the shadows. They had to take him down. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the back of the warehouse. There, standing in the shadows, was the man they had been hunting. He was tall, his face cold and calculating, and he knew exactly who they were. "You're too late," he sneered, his voice full of venom. "This isn't the end for me. It's just the beginning." Jack didn't flinch. "You're done," he said coldly. "You won't get away with this." The man laughed, but it was a hollow, empty sound. "You think you can stop me?" he mocked. "You've taken down a few of my men, but I have connections, people who will come for you. You have no idea what you've gotten yourselves into." Jack took a step forward, his voice steady and unyielding. "This ends tonight. There's no one left to protect you." With a flash of movement, the man reached for a gun at his side, but before he could draw it, Jack was on him, knocking the weapon from his hand with a swift, practiced motion. The fight was over in seconds. The leader was disarmed and restrained, his face now filled with disbelief. "You're finished," Jack said again, this time with finality. The authorities, who had been waiting for the signal, rushed in to take control of the situation. Jack stood over the leader, watching as he was escorted out of the warehouse. It was done. The operation had been taken down. The people who had been pulling the strings were no longer a threat. The city was safe, for now. Jack turned to his crew, his heart heavy but satisfied. They had done it. They had stopped the criminal empire from destroying everything they held dear. But Jack knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were always more battles to fight, more dangers to face. But for now, they had won. As the bikers gathered their things and made their way back to the safe house, Jack looked up at the night sky. The stars seemed to shine a little brighter tonight, as if the world had been set right again, even if only for a moment. He knew they had made a difference, and that was enough. The fight wasn't over, but they had done what they had set out to do. They had protected the innocent, taken down the criminals, and kept their promises. Jack couldn't ask for more.